will first introduce our speakers before turning it over to them to bring introductory remarks, and then we'll go right into Q&A. Before I do so, we do have French to English, English to French translation. So if you would require any of those, please click on the interpretation button. It is, at least on my screen, is bottom right. So I hope it's the same on yours. And then we will also monitor the chat in both the chat room and the Q&A room. So I encourage you to post questions, post comments, feedback, interact with us by posting in any one of those rooms. We do have people who will respond to the questions. Our panelists will respond to the questions. And like I said, we do want this to be an extremely interactive session. So without much delay to our speakers, Dr. Richard Mihigo is the coordinator of the Immunization and Vaccines Development Program at WHO Afro. We have Dr. Karim Bendahu, who is the head of Africa Bureau at the Merck Group. We have Sibusiso Lajuako, who is the Advocacy and Partnerships Manager for South Africa with PATH. And last but not least, we have Dr. Ama Pokwafeni, who's a Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Statistical, Social, and Economics Research with the University of Ghana. So like I said, it's an exciting lineup for today. Again, please do pose your questions to the panelists using the chat feature. This session is being recorded and will be available after the conference. When you go into the conference lobby, you'll see a resource, a link to some of the resources we have. And so in that section, you'll find the recording. So let me go ahead and start our discussion, coming first to you, Dr. Mihigo. Please talk to us about where we are in general with vaccine research and development across Africa. Has this affected immunization coverage on the continent? Where are we? Speak specifically to COVID, speak specifically in general to vaccines. What are we doing in research and development? Over to you, Dr. Mihigo.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lolem, and thank you for the invitation. It has been quite some very interesting panel discussions that have taken place since yesterday. And I would like to thank Amref for the invitation. I think it's a timely discussion that we are now having because in the middle of this pandemic, vaccine research and development has never been as an intense subject as it is today. So when we talked about vaccine research and development and probably manufacturing on the African continent, I think this is quite a very complex and to some extent capital intensive and high risk venture. We have seen in the past that vaccine research on the continent has been mainly dictated by several factors, being the public health priority for the continent, the need for research and innovation, and I'll come back to that, the markets for vaccine on the African continent. We are now a continent of 1.2, 1.3 billion of people, and I think it just makes sense to have a vaccine manufacturing capacity on the African continent. So when we looked at the major public health priority on the African continent, and we looked at the vaccine and research portfolio that is coming to our region, I think there is a big mismatch. When we looked at the issue like priority area like malaria, TB, HIV, where we need probably, there's first of all, sometimes no vaccine or beta vaccine. This is really needed urgently. We have seen also with some of the disease with epidemic potential, like the devastating Ebola outbreak that we had in West Africa, but we still have outbreak like Marburg, Lassa fever, that really needs specific research and vaccine for the development. And I think all of that really call for a renewed emphasis for vaccine research on the African region. Africa, by the way, has played in the past a major role in research and development, because there are quite some global vaccines that have been developed and where clinical trial happen mainly in Africa. This is the case of epidemic meningitis vaccine. We had quite a very extensive research around the rotavirus vaccine, Haemophilus influenza type B vaccine, where a clinical trial happened here on the continent, malaria, and more recently, Ebola and COVID-19. So, but to speak about a strong research and development, I think it's quite important, and I'm sure my colleagues on the panel will come back to that. The role of having a strong ethics and regulatory oversight in vaccine research and development. And I think this has been one of the weakest area on the continent that will need to be urgently addressed. WHO, recognizing this, established since 2006 now, almost 15 years, what we call the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, which is a platform that is putting together both national regulatory authorities as well as ethics committee to make sure that there is a proper oversight of clinical trial of vaccine on the region. So this has really helped a lot to streamline a lot the research and development on vaccine on the continent. And to your second point on where are we, is this had influenced really the coverage. We are in a situation where almost 90 to 95% of all the vaccines that are used in Africa are manufactured outside the continent. There are very few countries, Senegal, that's producing yellow fever, Egypt, South Africa, that have a very limited manufacturing capacity on the region. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has even accurately raised that issue on the lack of capacity on the African continent for not only strong research and development, but also vaccine manufacturing. So in terms of the challenges that really vaccine research and manufacturing is facing in this region, maybe I can talk about a few ones, and I'm sure we're going to develop this during the discussion. We have quite a very weak human resource and financial capacity on the continent. And this is where probably the government support at the beginning will be quite very important to make sure that there is incentive to invest in this area and to make sure that the resources that we have, the talent that we have on the continent can be put at good use in terms of developing products that are addressing the needs of the African region. The willingness probably to share technology and innovation with African countries, I think it's something that is also a limiting factor. And particularly in this world where there is a fierce competition around vaccines, I think accessing the global market become quite a very, very important issue. So when it comes to COVID-19 in particular, we saw only a few countries, South Africa, Kenya, to some extent, conducted clinical trial, which has had a consequence of very limited data on how the vaccines are performing on our continent. And I think the COVID-19 at least has exposed the needs for the region to engage not only in clinical trial, which are very well regulated indeed, but also to make sure that data is generated from the African continent so that we have a true picture on how the products are performing on the subpopulation in this region. So moving forward to conclude, maybe Lolem, I can say that we will need multiple factors to address this issue in the short, medium to the long term. Number one, I think country must absolutely plan and identify what are the key priorities for which investment must be done to conduct research that can be immediately applied to a solved problem in our region. To harness academic and the research and private sector pharmaceutical companies in the region, so that we can build at least a model that will be a public-private partnership that could help at least strengthen that area. And then finally, I believe it will be important to make sure that a technical and feasibility study be undertaken so that the right investment are done at the right place. And I'm happy to say that there are very few studies that are going already in this area. And WHO, we are very much in support of that. So thank you very much. And I'm looking really forward to the discussion in the next hour or so.
Dr. Mihigo, thank you. I think you've touched on, you did touch on so many important points. Some of these certainly will be addressed by the rest of our panelists. I mean, I picked up quite a number of things for Dr. Karim to address, for Dr. Ahmad to address, for Sibusisi to address. And, you know, I know, Dr. Ahmad, I'm going to come to you at the tail end, but I hope you noted just some of the points raised on financial capacity and the investments that are required. So hoping you're going to weave this in your response to my introductory question to you. No pressure there. But let me come to you, Dr. Karim, on, you know, we heard, we just, from Dr. Mihigo, we just heard, you know, this really critical need for research and innovation, right? So as you expand on just some of the challenges that your company faces, your firm faces with regard to vaccine manufacturing in Africa, where does research and innovation fit for a company such as, for an organization such as Merck? What are some of the changes that you would like to see? And those changes could be really overall, whether it's government, private sector, civil society, et cetera, and then maybe specifically to your niche. Over to you.
Oh, good afternoon. Thank you, Roland. Yeah, well, that's quite a tough question. But one thing is now...
I did say it will be an interesting and insightful panel.
Yeah, one thing is very well established now is that the current pandemic has highlighted the exposure of the low and middle income countries to the global vaccine shortage. So we have to find solution, and not solution in the frame of the COVID-19 only, but solution which extend beyond the COVID-19, because we have to keep doing the routine vaccination. And now we see that pandemics will occur in the future, and we need to increase the capacity. And despite the fact that in the developed country, the capacities, the industry in general have extended its manufacturing capacity, is not enough. So definitely, it's all our responsibility to make sure that this will happen in Africa. And this is something which is going to happen only if we can increase the global cooperation to achieve this goal. Otherwise, also it's not going to happen. And most of the solution to work together in the frame, you know, of this integrated ecosystem and approach is something which is already shared in this report of the UHC, which I consider as a very good report, not because I was one of the little player or little commissioner, but very good report which is shared in our the website of the Amref. The ideal world is to, to go into this project is to go together. The private sector should do something. The government should do something. Foundations, NGOs. So basically, I look at it from my windows. We have to vet business plan. We have to secure financial investment, and we have also to support strengthening of the wider system, such as health systems, and regulatory system. Coming to regulatory system, I strongly believe, and I'm a believer in the AMA, the African leadership, the African head of states, the African parliaments should ratify urgently the AMA, because the registration of the vaccines will be centralized. We need also to have, ideally, a coordinated strategy, to ensure that we are putting in place the right capacity and in the appropriate places to fulfill the need of the continent. We don't want to build unnecessary capacity and end up with a white elephant. This white elephant vaccine plans. We don't also want to underbuild and fail to meet the public health needs of the moment. That's for the first part of my comments, Laurent. Second part, related to the solution, technical solution. We'll share it later on. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Karim. And so, I really like this discussion on the integrated approach. I think for long, when we hear vaccine, we think of the chemist in the lab or the biologist in the lab. Maybe I'm saying that because I'm a chemist by training. So maybe, you think of them with the test tubes and things like that. And we don't really think of the role that each and every one of us can play in ensuring that vaccines are manufactured, and more importantly, ensuring that vaccination happens. And so that I am using as my segue to use Sibusisa to say, we've now talked about the role of government, we've talked about the importance of private sector, we've talked about even the importance of communities, which we can expand on later. So when we think about room for advocacy towards governments especially, in order to accelerate vaccine research and development on the continent. We just heard Dr. Karim's call to action, I would say that, towards the end, to our African governments to lead, African heads of states to the parliament. I would really like to know your perspectives in terms of advocacy and the ask we should have. Who do you see playing the role of influencers? And which decision/policy makers need to be convinced? Over to you, Sibusisa.
All right. Thank you, Lolam, and appreciate being part of this important discussion. So I think the first thing is in terms of advocacy, it should be more of a coordinated role. It should be advocacy from the advocates, but also we should work hand in hand. Advocates should work hand in hand with governments and also with the private sector. I asked who should be the critical players, and I think it's a wide range. But first of all, I think what's critical in this process is entities like the African Union, the African Union Development Agency out in NEPAD. I think we've already had things that are important in terms of AMA, the frameworks that should regulate or that should encourage countries to have a conducive environment for vaccines manufacturing. So I think we've got several levers that could be used in terms of the advocacy work and in terms of the advocacy itself. We've got the African Union, we've got Africa CDC, you've got WHO, Afro, and then you've got the African governments. The African governments actually hold key in terms of being key players in terms of to whom we should be advocating. I mean, we have seen how much less we have in terms of investments going into manufacturing in Africa. We've got more than a billion people. We've got about less than 1% of the vaccine manufacturing happening in the continent. And as our political leadership and as our people who shape policies in the countries, governments are definitely a key stakeholder in terms of the people that should be seen or to whom the advocacy asks should be targeted to. That is parliaments, that is the RECs, the regional economic hubs. They are also very important in terms of ensuring that we have the capacity to do manufacturing. And that will speak to coordinated efforts in terms of an approach towards increasing the capacity. And then that being said, the other important stakeholder is the national medical regulatory authorities. I think we've mentioned AMA and some of the elements that are important in ensuring that once vaccines are available, once products are available, they're easily accessible. So the regulatory authorities are quite key in that, because if they don't form part of this discussion, will have issues. Industry will have issues. So if we're talking about manufacturing in Africa, and we don't have them as a key stakeholder or as part of the people that are involved in the discussions, it doesn't make sense for the manufacturing sector in terms of, I mean, we know that already it takes on average up to 2 to 4 years for products to be available in Africa once they've been registered in first world countries. So if we don't look in terms of how do we involve our regulatory authorities at country level, but also at regional and continental level, I think that we will be missing an opportunity there. So they become key players as well in terms of ensuring that once vaccines or any products are available, they are accessible. And also, you don't want industry to be going to each and every country looking for approvals, because some of the countries do not necessarily have the capacity to do the approvals, or if they do, it takes them quite a long time. So Lolem, the other thing that you asked is what should be the asks. So I think this one has been said quite several times from the start of the conference and during this discussion. We need, first of all, we need political commitment. We need countries to sign that AMA treaty. We need countries to domesticate the AU model law. But more than anything else, we also need countries to invest into R&D. We need countries to put money. We've got only 5 countries in the whole continent that have got some level of capacity to develop vaccines. We've got 55 member states of the African Union. We need more countries to invest into health R&D. We need more countries to invest into vaccines manufacturing. 2009, we had the H1N1 influenza. In 2014, we had the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Today, we are grappling with COVID-19. All these pandemics that need vaccines, that need some level of innovation for countries to be able to address. But we still sit with very few countries that have got limited capacity in terms of vaccine manufacturing. So you ask what should be the asks. We need countries to sign. We need countries to commit. We need countries to put in. Resources. And then the other ask should be: we need pharma to work with advocates to call for IP waivers. That will help in terms of ensuring that we are not limited by intellectual property that exists on products that have been done elsewhere, or even in Africa as well. Africa is already involved in a lot of clinical trials as well, but we need more investments into these clinical trials. We've got a limited number of countries that are involved in clinical trials, and even in those countries, we've got limited facilities or institutions that are able and capable of conducting those clinical trials. So we do need investments into those areas if we are to have a sustainable vaccine manufacturing initiative in Africa as well. And then we need more in terms of building the skills of our people in terms of vaccine manufacturing itself, in terms of the clinical science or the science that's involved in terms of getting to a vaccine, from clinical trials, from the molecules in a laboratory to conducting preclinical trials, to conducting clinical trials, to the actual manufacturing of the vaccines. We need more capacity in terms of that. Currently, we've got very few countries that have got that full cycle in terms of being involved in the production of any product in health, whether it's drugs or vaccines. But we need more African scientists, we need more tech transfer, we need more sharing of knowledge between private and public sector. So I think if you ask me what we should be advocating for, those are some of the things that entities like Africa CDC, African Union should be looking at. That's what advocates should be also continue to ask for as well. And then lastly, we need, I think one other thing that we need to highlight is what Meg has mentioned as well, the importance of public-private partnerships. That builds into the tech transfer, the skills development as well. Big pharma or pharmaceutical companies shouldn't be seen to be just these business entities that come into the continent and sell products and leave, but they should be entities that work with local entities. I mean, J&J is currently working with Aspen in South Africa. We need to see more of such public-private partnership like BioVac is doing with the South African government. We need to see more in terms of the North-South collaboration, in terms of capacity building, and in terms of ensuring that we've got long, sustainable solutions that are in Africa. Then the last point in terms of the advocacy, I think we need to do a bit more if we're to have a sustainable vaccine manufacturing in Africa on addressing vaccine hesitancy. It is amazing the number of conspiracies that go on in the continent and that lead to people not being ready to take up vaccines as well. That in the long run, if it's not adequately addressed, is going to affect the level of the vaccine uptake by our people, but it's also eventually it's going to affect vaccine manufacturing itself as well. If you've got a continent that's still grappling with so many of them, and this is a global it's a global challenge. But I think in terms of advocacy work, we need also to put in more effort in terms of ensuring that people are educated about vaccines and people are informed about vaccines. Information that is accurate is readily available, and that takes advocates, it takes governments, it takes private sector, it takes everybody to ensure that we have the right information being made available to the African people. So in terms of advocacy asks, Lelem, I think, yeah, that's what I will put. There could be so many, but this is what I thought would be relevant for the discussion. Thank you.
No, Sibusiso, thank you very much. I think you covered a really impressive list of asks, and I like that you really emphasized specifically on what we could do to support some of the regulatory bodies. I mean, it's important, and I think COVID has brought that up. I mean, vaccines just don't come in without us making sure that they've passed some kind of regulatory, I'll say test for lack of a better word. I think I'm getting so excited that I'm forgetting my words as well. And I really want to get to Dr. Amma because I want her to talk to us about financing. All three of you have mentioned the need for investments. How do we do that? We do know, I mean, there's so many reports out of the World Bank, out of African Development Bank, just, talking in general about our financial status and our economies in so many of our African countries. Can we actually finance R&D on the African continent? Amma?
Thank you very much.
There you go.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on this panel. As a health economist, I can't help but share a few of the figures that sets the scene on the African continent as we have it today. So I'll just highlight a few things that I think we need to reflect on. The fact that we are producing less than 1% of our own vaccines right here on our continent. Our supply is entirely external. Our procurement is 60% being covered by UNICEF Supply Division. If you look at vaccine funding and investment, global vaccine stakeholders have shown very less preference to invest in Africa over the years. Our governments are also showing low interest in vaccine production and establishment. Unless there's external investment, we don't seem to want to get into this as countries in Africa. And we also agree that manufacturing costs, Dr. Karim here can show you, is extremely very costly to set up manufacturing costs. And so we know that the lack of standardization also brings up a lot of problems. These are some of the key issues I want to highlight as we go forward and advocate for investments in R&D in Africa. If I move on to my next slide, this is Africa, comparing Africa to China and India. So if you look at level of the numbers, you look at our population, and then you look at the number of drug manufacturers, you can see where we are as a continent. Compared to India, we have just about 375 drug manufacturers, and most of them are small. Our operations, most of the time, do not even meet international standards. And if you look at the market value of the potential market value for our drugs. It's quite high, and we need to do a lot to invest in drug manufacturing in the continent. This is just one table. I'll move on to the next one. So if you ask me about fundamental shifts, we have looked at investment in R&D, and we know that in 2017, AU set a goal asking governments to put in at least 1% of GDP in R&D. I know for sure that many countries haven't been able to do this. If you look at global R&D spending in the whole world in 2020, Africa's share was 0.9% compared to 44.3% in Asia, for example. So we are investing very little of our GDP in R&D. If you look at the funding models for international cooperation in vaccine research, we found out with COVID that seems to work for almost all the countries, for Norway, UK, Canada to come together and invest together. So we need that collaboration, and that funding model will work for us if we decide to really start investing in R&D in Africa. We've talked about controls, so I will not touch on that, but we really need to make efforts when it comes to quality controls and standardization. And then finally, I want to touch on trade and market facilitation. We cannot do this on our own. We need to be able to have trade, open the markets, expand the markets. But there are so many barriers. Our reports for this conference, the UHC going forward, we see that there are so many barriers to trade that hamper health investments in Africa. And we really need to start looking at these. So I think for the first part of the question, I think these really point to the fact that there's a lot we have to do fundamentally to shift things around for investments in manufacturing. Thank you.
Thank you, Amma. I want to actually go to some questions from the chat. There's some action going on in the chat, and so Dr. Kareem, there's a question on. Excuse me. There's a question on the importance, of course, supporting the importance for private, public partnerships, making sure that all sectors are involved. And so the question is, how can, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, how can a Pan-African consortium involve all actors and enhance training of skills, including youth? Maybe you could talk just a little bit about that. And what I'll also add to that is, Amma mentioned just how, the sheer amount that will be required to invest in manufacturing. So as we talk about manufacturing, as we talk about training, one, what does the investment in manufacturing look like? When we talk about this all hands together approach to research and development of vaccines, the second part is training, ensuring that young people are involved, training young people. As we look at R&D, do we have the institutes that will ensure that our young people are trained in vaccine R&D?
Again, it's a tough question. Thank you very much, Lola. Look, I would like to share my experience in the course of our activities in Africa. We have discussions with many companies and mainly public-private institutions interested in manufacturing vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
We have to realize something. Some pool procurement platforms have done a tremendous job in terms of pool procurement, in terms of decreasing and giving access to low and middle income countries to the vaccines. So today the price of a vaccine is relatively low. Look at the ones of the COVID-19, which have been discovered in 6 months, and billions have been invested in such a short time. At the end of the day, it's $3-4. Okay, so it's something which is now relatively cheap. And AMA has shown us that the investment is up to 60 million, 70 million, depending on the size and the platform, but it's expensive. So you have there an economy of scale. That's why I was mentioning we need in Africa a coordinated strategy. This is very clear. You can put it under the Africa Union, you can put it under the WHO. Mainly Africa Union CDC would be the ideal partner to manage, you know, this strategy where we have the day you start to have project immediately, you know, the capacity advancement of the people is organized. I mean, it's not something very difficult. And we have the resources in Africa, and we have also in the African diaspora a lot of resources that we can bring back to Africa. And this is a reality. To an extent, we can assess, we as a company, the readiness of this institution that I have mentioned and the robustness of their plan for biomanufacturing. We have the skills because we are very, very well ranked biomanufacturers. And as per today, we have a pipeline of companies that we are working with. There is a difference between they vary in terms of technology readiness, but it starts from fill and finish factory, which is a good step, up to the full-scale manufacturing. And those projects and those companies and those public-private institutions represent an investment pipeline ready for support, but we need the support. Because any business plan that you will put together, remember, if you go really to the business part, investment part, financial part, at the end of the day, you will see that you need a kind of donation somehow, in part, in financing this kind. And we, because we are a German company, I'm in touch with some German institution who are willing to finance, if it is a public-private institution which is going for a local manufacturing, €1 for €1 invested or $1 for $1 invested. So it's such a kind of call that I would like to have today. My dear African leadership, you have to invest a bit of money with the private sector in the vaccine manufacturing. It's extremely strategic. Now we have solution. At Merck, as an example, our expertise includes conceptual design of manufacturing facilities, process development, appropriate technology, the experience of working with some largest vaccine manufacturer in the world. We brought all the knowledge together to design something which can fit with the African needs. It's a really robust plan for manufacturing, and the technology is an amazing one. You know, can you have to? We talked about research and development. True. We talked about IP rights. IP rights. We can have this discussion the day you have a manufacturing capacity in the world. Otherwise, I cannot imagine in the pandemics one company completely saying no to a local manufacturer. No, you I don't allow you. This happened with Serum Institute of India. You know, it is today the largest manufacturer in the world. We have to deal with the Serum Institute of India, and they got all the rights on the vaccine. So basically, we organize in our company, and we are proud of that because it's not our core business. I mean, we are, at the end of the day, we are a science technology company, but we organize a team which is able to support, to install, validate, use the technology, you know, and it's really very high standard technology. I don't want to mention some of them, but you have also the syringes industry. If you want vaccine are in vial. If you don't go for prefilled syringes, then you need also to enhance, you know, this syringes industry. So the key to success for the companies, we are working with this wider network and institution, and we are trying to We are not trying. We have today the solution. Now we have to go to move forward. Thank you. Thank you, Ola.
Thank you. Thank you. And so then, Richard, if I come back to you, so Kareem talked about the need for a joint effort, joint African effort, and really appeal to, a lot of our African leaders. And I think, WHO Afro really sits in what I would say is a sweet spot, because you have these conversations with, Africa CDC, Africa Union, and you also have conversations as part of the COVAX facility as well. So, you're kind of, ears in both places. Sometimes we wish we were you, so we can be a fly on the wall in these different entities. So I was wondering if you could please speak to what kind of discussions are happening at Africa CDC, at the Africa Union, when it comes to this joint. I mean, we've seen the Africa CDC do really a fantastic job, Africa Union, in this joint response to COVID. I mean, it was unbelievable, just the galvanizing and, getting all of us behind fighting COVID. Now we've come to, now when we talk about R&D, what are those conversations within this space of Africa? And then what are also the conversations that are going on, if you can share, within the COVAX facility when it comes to supporting this very nascent vaccine R&D industry on the African continent? You're muted.
Sorry. All right. No, thank you very much for these questions. Clearly at WHO, we have been in this conversation and engagement for some time now. We do clearly support the vaccine manufacturing agenda on the continent. Our engagement a few years back, if you remember very well, during the H1N1 pandemic in 2008-9, I think we were almost on the same situation, even worse, where Africa was the only continent without any access to H1N1 vaccines. And we were lucky enough that was not a major pandemic like what we are going through with COVID. And we really learn a lot, and the lack of capacity in vaccine research, vaccine manufacturing in the African region became quite evident. So we initiated, I remember that time, a conversation with South Africa, working with BioVac, on trying to help the country to put in place a fill and finish capacity, for instance, for influenza vaccines. And at the same time, working with the other regional initiatives that were aiming at least to promote some independence within the African continent. So with this COVID-19 vaccine, and even before COVID-19, when we went through Ebola a couple of years ago, I think, again, they need to have vaccines that are ready as a strategic tool to deal with the outbreak was central. And looking at the very low interest of many companies, even in starting clinical trials in the region, we took the initiative, and which is not necessarily our role as a global public health institution, to support the development, and we collaborated quite extensively with Merck in the Ebola vaccine in Guinea for clinical trial, and then in DRC, which we came up with the first Ebola vaccine that were qualified by WHO. But I think what is more important, and where this conversation should take us when we take a forward-looking, I think it's very encouraging now to see that from the conversation that are currently going on through the African Union, we are working hand in hand with Africa CDC to make sure that there is not only, and I think everybody talked about the political engagement, the will for the government to take the ownership of this process. And I think if you looked at the current environment, macro level, and I think colleague, panelist, Dr. Ama may talk a bit more on that, on the macroeconomic environment. I think with the African trade agreement that was put in place, I think all of that is aiming to put an environment, a framework by which even the public-private partnership we are talking about, or even the private investment, can find an environment by which these initiatives can evolve. So we will definitely encourage such movement, such discussion, and we are very much engaged in that. And bringing to your last point on the COVAX and the conversation going in COVAX, I think clearly CEPI, as you know, from which also was an initiative that was born immediately after Ebola. I think we may need to see a similar initiative for the African region, where the African Union will also not depend on the willingness of a few countries, developed countries, to invest in basic science that can lead us to discovery. There are very interesting conversations on the chat where people are talking about the basic infrastructure, research, and etc. But I'd like to mention something. Maybe we may not wait 200 years to move to a new technological revolution, because I think with technology now, I think there is a big thing that we could do by leapfrogging some of these new innovation to come up with a completely new platform for technology transfer and production without necessarily waiting the decades and decades for vaccine production. Now, with COVAX facility, which clearly is an initiative that is going to stay for some time, it's clear that the conversation around supporting the African region in terms of vaccine independence, in terms of vaccine capacity, manufacturing, is it something that will be central to the future of the COVAX initiative? And we continue to this conversation and engagement with African CDC on that. There is even a conference that is planned in the next couple of weeks on vaccine manufacturing capacity in the African region. So we are looking very much forward also to engage in that conversation so that we can at least raise not only awareness, but move from awareness to commitment, where country can start now to put resources on the ground to make sure that basic things like the push towards a African medicine agency become a reality from this continent, so that we don't go for multiple regulatory approval when it comes to the negotiation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. And so I just want to link this joint Africa response directly back again into financing before I come to you, Sibusiso, with the question on different regulatory frameworks. But let me go first to Ama. So Ama, you know, we've seen the African Union, of course, lead the joint COVID response, as I mentioned before. Yes, they've secured funding for approximately 270 million COVID-19 vaccine doses through the African Vaccine Acquisition Task Team. How do you see the African Union playing a role going forward in bringing about greater regional cooperation in funding future health emergencies? And there's also a question on the chat related to this from Isei Dombi, who asks, can the AU put together financing for joint Pan-African vaccine research and innovation? Well, we'll save the part of has there been discussion on these lines, but maybe we can answer the first part of his or her question. Ama?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to share a slide again to illustrate one point that I've made in this session. Let me just put it in slide mode so you can just see for yourself. So this is a financial outlook for where the Africa CDC is getting support financially for all its operations and all its work that it's doing in 2020. And as you can see from this graph, 16% of the entire funding comes from member states. The majority of this is coming from foundations, bilateral organizations, multilaterals, and very, very, very tiny portion from our private sector. And so we talk about engagement of our national continental institutions like African CDC, and we realize that for them to be sustainable, we really need to get our governments to put in their money. We need them to be financed by our own governments. If these funding blocks were to fail, what it means is that African CDC will not be able to do what it has been mandated to do. And that is the reality. And so going forward, I just want to talk about the fact that we really have found out that funding gaps is a big problem. In our report for the conference, we have seen this as a huge problem. We really talk about engagement, but we don't want to invest in bringing in these engagements to come to fruition. So yes, we do need a political drive and acceptance within member states. Advocacy is key. I'm happy that CPC is saying that, and it's true. We really need that advocacy, but we also need to get our plan moving, and we need our governments to back this with money. Thank you.
Thank you, Amma. And so, CPC, we've heard throughout, we've talked about just the vaccine production in Africa. We've said it's slow. We've said we know that less than 1% of vaccines used on the continent are produced here. We've talked about just some of the challenges, and we've also proposed solutions. So, and remember in one of Amma's slides earlier on, she alluded to, again, the cost of vaccine manufacturing. So wanted to ask you, what are the most critical and concrete steps that vaccine manufacturers in Africa must take if they're to survive and thrive? And so, and if you could maybe also, in responding to that, really highlight again the role of advocacy in supporting vaccine manufacturers. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Luan. I think there is a big role for advocacy in terms of supporting vaccine manufacturing, and I think the first thing is, first of all, to just ensure that we consistently move towards a continent that has self-sufficiency in terms of vaccine production. We have seen this through COVID in terms of the rush for vaccines, the discussions around equitable access to vaccines. And I think there are a few things that as people working in advocates, we have realized. I mean, there are some gaps that we think need to be taken in terms of ensuring that we as a continent take critical and concrete steps towards ensuring that there's sustainable manufacturing in Africa. I think the first piece, I'll go back to it again, it's on regulatory and political support. We cannot overemphasize the need and the importance for countries and our leaders to ensure that, first of all, they sign and ratify AMA, that is the African Medicines Agency. We need to ensure that we've got regulatory processes that facilitate and enhance access to vaccines and other products. We need to ensure that we are able to work seamlessly in ensuring that there's no red tape in terms of products. I'm saying this because it is a frustration not just for the population or the people that are expecting to benefit from the health products and vaccines. It is a frustration as well for the manufacturers themselves. And if we're talking about manufacturing in Africa, we need to get this right. We know that regulatory harmonization could accelerate timelines from the current 2 to 4 years or 4 to 7 years in the sub-Saharan region. It could accelerate the timeline by 40 to 60%. And actually, COVID-19 has shown us that it is possible to actually actually work in terms of approvals even more faster than that. We also have we need to also ensure that other tools that the African Union is utilizing, like the AU model law, are adopted by countries as well. I think one of the things that I also wanted to emphasize, seeing that we are making reference to entities such as Africa CDC and the AU, is we need to ensure that initiatives such as the COVID-19 Vaccines Delivery Alliance are given a priority. We need to ensure that these new initiatives that are ensuring that there's faster access to vaccines are given priority, and countries are willing and able to work through these issues. We're currently faced with issues where we are getting vaccines into countries, but then issues around vaccine readiness. Those issues, we need to learn from them. We need to have health systems that are able to administer those vaccines, that are able to sustain the administration of vaccines and immunizations even beyond the COVID-19 that we are facing. And then the basic things that we need to put in place. We need to ensure that currently our manufacturers depend on imports for the bulk of their production, and this includes basic things such as active pharmaceutical ingredients. This includes laboratory equipment, reagents, production of raw materials. A whole bulk of these things are imported. We need to ensure that when we're talking about sustaining or critical things that are important in sustaining vaccine manufacturing in Africa, we need to have these addressed. We need to have some of this or all these things made in Africa. Also, going back, we need to be very deliberate about the public-private partnerships. I mean, BioVac is one example that is great. It's great to hear Richard speaking about how WHO Afro works with some of these institutions that are in Africa. I think those are models that should be emulated. Those are models that we should copy as well in terms of ensuring that we have sustained vaccine manufacturing in Africa. And then lastly, Africa as a continent accounts for more than 40% of counterfeit drugs, and that's a report from WHO. So we need to ensure that when we talk about manufacturing in Africa, we work with the regulatory frameworks that are available, but we also need to ensure that we produce quality products that will have our people have confidence in them. If we are saying we're going to be doing vaccines in Africa, we need to ensure that we meet the quality requirements that come with these products. We also need to ensure that we do not say because we are so many years behind so many other nations or other countries, we should relax issues around quality. We need to ensure that we get that right. We need to ensure that the people that are receiving this have got the highest level of confidence in the products that are being made in the continent, and that could be through several mechanisms. We've spoken about tech transfers, how we could be learning from other countries that are ahead of ourselves in terms of the manufacturing industry. So I think those are some of the issues that I see as very critical in terms of from an advocacy perspective, but also from what policymakers and our African Union leadership, Africa CDC should be looking at and also driving those discussions. Thank you, Lolam.
Thank you, Sibusiso. And so we are actually at time, but I do want each of our panelists to give, closing remarks. I will beg of our audience to indulge us for just a few more minutes. I promise we won't go over 5 minutes. So Karim, I'll come to you. Maybe what is the one thing vaccine manufacturers need? So listening to this whole discussion, and I know there are several things, but the one thing that is top priority, then second thing, what next? And that question of what next is coming to you, Richard, Amma, and Sibusiso right after this.
I mean, my message remains the same call. We need right now, in the frame of this COVID-19, to increase the global cooperation to achieve the goal of at least seeing by next 2 years, 3, 4 new vaccine manufacturing plant established in Africa. We are all ready. The energy is there. Let's put things together. We will succeed. All parts are ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Karim. Over to you, Richard. What next?
Yeah, it's a very challenging question. Well, I will just say that, first of all, we should not be in this same situation if another pandemic occur, at least for the African region, in the African continent. We need absolutely to make sure that our regulatory frameworks are very well aligned, and there is an urgent need for the ratification by all countries for the African Medicine Agency. I think it's really key and will help a lot. What Subiso was talking about, quality of products that are even being produced in the African region. Secondly, I think we need to really invest in the human capital. I think most of our young talents go and are trained in Africa and then end up by being in the Europe, America, where they can be, blossoming their talent. I think we need to not only train our talent, keep them on the African continent, and then provide them with the right environment for them to deliver research of quality. And then finally, I think we talked about government engagement, and I think it will be key here at this stage where we have a very weak yet public-private sector environment, that the government sector play a key role in trying to put in place the building blocks, the fundamental things that will help us to build healthier and prosperous structures in the continent. Maybe I would stop there, and I'm looking forward for a next discussion around this so exciting topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Amma?
Okay, thank you so much. So I just want to highlight the fact that investments in our manufacturing sector is key. We can never talk about going forward with vaccine manufacturing if we are not ready to put our financial measures in order. So we have to look at our fiscal and monetary measures to really find a way of making it a very good investment case for businesses to want to do manufacturing, to want to set up manufacturing plants in Africa. So we go back to trade barriers, we go back to our non-trade barriers, our supply chain systems, regional hubs. There's so much we can do to make investing in this sector in Africa possible. And again, we need the political drive and member countries to come on board to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Amma. And Sibusiso for the last word on what next.
All right, thank you. I think I cannot overemphasize what Amma has just said. We need investments into manufacturing, into the entire R&D chain. We need more investments. I think Richard has already touched on this. Look at the number of countries that have signed onto Amma and that have ratified the treaty. It's just not good. We need our leaders to do better. We need leaders to show commitment, not just commitment in signing, but also ensuring that whatever is required to ensure that capacity is built, capacity is sustained, we need them to be on the ball. We need the AU to lead. I know there's quite a massive drive to get countries to sign. We need countries to come to the party as well. The RECs should be playing a role in that as well. And then I think lastly, the one thing that I think is also important is we need to, as Africa, we need to invest in our health systems as well. If we are to sustain vaccines manufacturing, we need health systems that are capable of also sustaining that in terms of the delivery of the healthcare systems in the country. Public-private partnerships, I think that would be my last point, that needs to grow. Africa needs to benefit from that. The North-South leaderships should continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to use this time to say thank you, first of all, to all of our speakers. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing so much knowledge with us. Thank you.